For those of you who know Arlan, you know that her story is impressive and her impacts are even more impressive. This is the last speaker in our series for this competition, and it's somebody that I was just so excited to bring in because Arlan so strongly represents what it's like to come from outside and to just claw your way inside and make change happen when it comes to the money that makes project happen. I'm not going to say any more because I'd love to hear Arlan's story in Arlan's own voice. Arlan, I know you've done it a lot. I know you've had to tell this to a lot of people, but I would love just a short version of where you came from to where you're at now.
Sure. So first I wanted to say hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, spending your afternoon, early evening with me. Thanks, Lonnie, for the invite, and it's good to see everybody. So I'm Arlan. I saw, the survey is just a genius idea, by the way, because I don't think I've had that before. It just really sets the stage and takes the place of like in person. You're like, raise your hand if you know anything about Backstage. So I started Backstage Capital officially 5 years ago. We just celebrated our 5th year anniversary birthday hybrid on September 15th. I turned 40 this month, so that tells you kind of the age and where I was when I started it. Prior to starting Backstage Capital, had experienced housing and food insecurity for most of my adult life and, growing up as well. And, but had like a lot of cool different gigs that I kind of started for myself. I had a music magazine, a print magazine in my 20s. I toured with indie bands in my early 20s as a tour manager at that point, booking shows, really low-key indie shows. And I worked my way up to arena level shows as a production coordinator and road manager by my early 30s, and everything in between, and have been homeless, have been on food stamps, have been in 5-star hotels, on the road with a musician, all of it. And around 31, so 2010, 2011, started looking in and hearing about this place called Silicon Valley and Startup Land. And it was interesting to me. I was so curious about it. Threw myself into learning as much as I could about it, much like I'm sure many of you have. And it was in that learning and thinking about starting my own tech company that I came across this really ridiculous statistic that 90% of venture funding goes to affluent white men, which didn't make any sense because white men generally make up only 1/3 of the country, and affluent white men make up even less of the country. So how does that make sense? So I took my frustration, my anger, my sadness, knowing that, and turned it into an opportunity and said, what would happen if instead of 90% going in that direction, what if it was flipped on its head and there was a fund that invested the opposite, if not more, into underrepresented founders. So I had like negative bank account balance, had no angel capital to speak of, was living with my mom out of a hotel for some of this, and other, even less than that for part of it. But starting in 2015, I was able to start raising. So it took about 3 years before anybody would take it seriously. And about 2015, was able to start raising a little bit at a time, and then built that up over the past few years. Today, we are at more than $12 million raised, 25,000 at a time. We're at almost 150 companies invested in, after seeing more than, I would say, probably 7,500 at this point, because we invest in about 2% of what we see. So that's a ton of companies every year. 4-city accelerator that we launched last year, that's on pause right now, but was just an incredible daunting experience that the team put together, and have really gone, I think, Backstage, including Chacha, who's here with me, have really gone kind of far into changing the narrative in Silicon Valley and beyond, and bringing a spotlight to underrepresented and what we call underestimated founders, who, in our view, it can mean a lot of things, but we focus ourselves on women across the board, people of color, and LGBTQ founders, because I identify as all three, and they say go with what you know. So that's where I started. So that's where we are today. Released this book in May. Very excited about that, and have a few things on the burner, and I'm happy to talk about anything you'd like to talk about. Open book. I'll let you know if it's too much, but pretty much open book here. Whatever is helpful.
Thank you. I appreciate the open book questions. I am going to jump into ones that are really personal to me.
Do it.
So, you had this music background, you had this homeless background, which I also have both of. And there's this other thing, which is punk rock.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a tiny bit about your punk rock background, but also I'm curious if it in any way educated where you're at now?
Yeah, I wish the story was that I was like a bass player in a punk rock band. I wish that were, even if that exists, I don't even know anymore. But I wish that were the case. But no, so I started out when I said that I worked on the road. So when I was 21, I just turned 21, and that was right after 9/11. And I was working at a bank. I was doing 10 key by touch data entry. So it's one hand doing this for 8 hours, and really fast. And I was encoding checks. So I was encoding like millions of dollars worth of checks so that they could be then taken to a bank. And I was getting paid probably $15 an hour. And it was, that was amazing. Actually, that was really amazing at that time at 21. But anyway, I was incredibly bored and just so disillusioned and so whatever. And I came across this band while I was listening to music to kind of get out of my head with it and just get through the day. And this band is called Golden Boy, and they live in Bergen, Norway. They still do to this day. This was almost 20 years ago. And I just thought their music was so cute at the time. It was, I was into like R&B and pop music and classical and alternative and country. And I was into a lot of different types of music, but pop punk, I didn't even know what that was. But I just thought their music was cute. This garage band had cute music. So I got in touch with the lead singer, Toke. His name is Torkel, but people call him Toke, so that tells you kind of where his mind is. And I got in touch with Toke, and he's in Norway. I'm in Dallas, Texas. And I'm like, hey, I think I was on AOL chat or something. I was like, hey, can I see you play live? And he's like, yeah, we're in Norway, so if you want to come to Norway. And I was like, well, can I see you play live in the States? And he said, well, we tried to book a show, and we tried to book a tour in the States, and it just doesn't work out because we don't have a name, and it's just hard to do. So I said, okay, I'm going to figure out how to book a tour for you because I want to see you play live. If I book a tour for you in the United States, will you come here? And he was like, sure. If you book a tour for us, we will get the money to fly there and bring our equipment and do what we need to do. And so I had no idea what I was talking about. I had no idea what I was talking about, but it was interesting to me, and it was like, I figured if it had been done before, it had to be able to be done again. It wasn't like I was talking about something that was supernatural. It was like, if I applied myself, I could probably figure it out. So I went, I figured it out. This was before you could Google everything. So I had all these folders on the floor, and I called all these places, and I put together a map and a schedule that I thought made sense. And I just started calling really indie bars and clubs all over the country. And just as I went, I'd call one place and I'd pick up the jargon, and I'd call the next place and I'd know what I was talking about, at least look like it. And by the end of it, I was just like talking to people like Snake and Biscuit. And I was just like, hey man, you got to give us half the door, man. And it was just like, I went from not knowing anything to like, yeah, if they don't get half the door, we're not even walking in. And I did talk like that. Thank you. And so I booked it, and they came out, and we went on tour for 2 summers in a row, and I was their tour manager and their booker, and kept them out of jail, kept them out of trouble. in many ways, and they're just lovely people that played some music. So what I learned from there, I took with me when I went into the bigger gigs years later that I had wanted to do for all of my life, and then bringing that into this world, this investment world. Absolutely. I mean, it's just like trial by fire. It's figuring things out as you're moving. It is working with people from all different backgrounds, all different agendas, and trying to make sure everybody feels seen and has a place there. And all of that was part of that. And mostly it was just that kind of independent spirit of, I mean, I'm sure Chacha would agree, like at Backstage, we have an independent spirit of, we're going to figure it out. We don't need a big institution to help us figure anything out.
I love that. There's a talk that I give that starts with "Punk Rock Saved My Life," and I feel that, you know, in your story reminds me of something I've seen in everything I've read and seen on you, and that's that when you're faced with something that you don't know how to do, you don't let that stop you, right? You get in there. And there's something that you found out way before I did. Like, I wish I could have figured this out on my own. And that's that you knew to seek mentorship. I've heard you speak about that. And I'm wondering, I have 3 questions, and I can ask them 3 separately, but I'm going to lead you to, how did you know to seek mentorship? How did you find mentorship? Let's just start with those 2. How did you even know? How did you know I should seek this? And then how did you do it?
How did I know? That's an interesting question, because I would have to probably spend a lot of time breaking down if that's because I'm a Black woman in America, if that's what I figured like I was supposed to do. You ask, or if because I'm a woman or something like that. I have to figure out if it was that or if it was because I was me.
Right.
But I just knew because people had done things before, people had forged paths before me, and no one was ever going to be exactly like me and vice versa. But there's just so many breadcrumbs. There's so much you can learn, not necessarily from someone directly, like not necessarily, but all those things we do for that legacy that people leave, those breadcrumbs, they leave books behind, they leave podcasts now and blogs and writings and interviews and things like that. What I think the best lesson I learned was that, yes, mentorship is important, but that you can get mentorship from places that are not necessarily one-on-one with that person. And then that's because, and the reason that's so valuable is because you can just take that anywhere. You can be anywhere, you can do anything, and you can just, if you have access to a book, if you have access to your memory of something, of an interview, you have the ability to learn from that. So I think that it's important. What was the second part of the question?
Was how you found it, like how, so besides the non one-on-one stuff, the actual one-on-one stuff, how did you find the mentorship that you were seeking?
I asked. I have a high tolerance for no. I just do, and I don't like to go to the same tree over and over again and say, I don't think it's good to sort of bully someone into saying yes. But when it comes to volume, I can hear no from multiple people and be just fine. And I think that that has helped me in so many. There's no way I could do this job and not be able to withstand no. Get told no all the time. And so I asked, and I first had to figure out what I wanted, where I was going, had to assess where I was, and then I went out and asked, and then started getting creative in different ways. Along the path, I have been an interviewer in some way or another since I was 24. I had my music magazine, print magazine, where I had to interview people, and I got to interview people. I then wrote for a lot of things like AOL Queer Sighted, and for Suicide Girls, and for all of these things. And then it turned into, so I had my magazine, and then it turned into online stuff, and then it turned into blogging. I had a blog for 7 years called Your Daily Lesbian Moment, where a lot of that was interviews. Most of it was just typing, but a lot was interviews. And now I have Your First Million, the podcast that I have. And the hack there is you don't necessarily have to go to someone and say, hey, will you be my mentor? Some of it can be you just kind of hack your way in, and either you put together a podcast, like real low key, get your Anchor app. The app Anchor is just like the bomb. Or start a blog or something and say, look, I'm going to ask 10 people if they'll let me interview them. And 1 or 2 is going to say yes. It's just a fact. And then you take that learning from those interviews, and over time you have an archive of information, and you might even use it and say, hey, I'm going to pull you to the side. The last 5 minutes of this is going to be off the record. Can I ask you about a certain thing that I have that I'm doing? And those are like little hacks to work on. But I was always thinking about, how do I get the information? I don't know if I'm going to have somebody who's going to be my life coach right now, but the mentorship I can certainly create for myself.
Fantastic. Do you mind reminding everyone, you said it right at the beginning, of how many companies or ventures you've now invested in?
Yeah, I think we're right at 150. I'll have to do the final tally at the end of the year, but we reached 100 in May of 2018. Then we did another 24 last year through our accelerator. And then this year we invested in more than 20 companies through COVID. We had about a year between last summer and the top of this summer where we just couldn't find any funding. Again, it's a constant thing, but we had invested in more than 100 companies at that point, and then brought it back and just kind of kept going. So about 150, which is more than 300 founders. So 150 companies, and they're all over the place when it comes to their location and what they work on, their industry.
Wow. And the approximate amount of money?
About 12 million has been raised, a little more than 12 million, about 10 million has been deployed. So yeah, because when we started, we were doing 25K checks. And 25K, by the way, in the venture world is so small, but at the same time, 25K was more than I had made in a year my whole life, up until 35. So I know how far it can take you.
25K can change a person's life.
Yeah, and if you're working on something, you have other stuff going for you, that's what we're looking for. But you're able to do stuff without the capital, because that's all we know. That's what we know. And it's not fair, it's not right, none of that, but we're playing a catch-up game. And $130 billion was deployed in venture capital in 2018, and 250 million of that went to Black women. So the equivalent of the last bird round, the bird scooter round, went to every Black woman total in the country out of 130 billion that was available and deployed. So we're playing a catch-up game, and we're a small part of that. But even that was not being talked about 5 years ago. So the fact that it's now just front and center narrative is a testament to the work you can do outside of just the straight capital. It's brilliant. Josh just asked if I ever led a round. I want to grab that. Yes, we have led rounds. Nice. People like us on their cap table, even if we have small amounts, and we can lead multi-million-dollar rounds with 100,000 or so. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And Josh, maybe you can answer Jackie's question in the chat. That'd be great. Yeah. The things you're saying are painful and also brilliant opportunities, and it's amazing to see you taking advantage of them. Silicon Valley has ways that it judges success. I'm curious how you judge success. Mm-hmm. I judge it in a few ways. I judge it by reaching milestones that I've set for myself. 2014, when I was homeless and was on food stamps and didn't know where I was going to get my next meal, I said I was going to invest in 100 companies by 2020. Reached that in 2018. I think that's success. I mean, I still got a long way to go, but I think that's success. But other ways I really look at it honestly, and I'm not even, there's no spin here. Every single day of my life, every single day without fail, somebody writes to me, at least one person, if not several. and says something like, you helped me by just being in this interview, or I saw you on Fast Company, or I heard this podcast or whatever. You helped me know that I had the ability to start a company and gave me confidence. Or you make me proud of myself. Like that kind of ROI, obviously harder to measure. Obviously, some people might think that's like bleeding heart stuff. But man, you get the one life, right? Just the one life. And to me, the fact that there are people now who 5 years ago did not believe that they had a chance at generational wealth, at producing generational wealth through this particular career and journey of innovation, who today may not only believe it, but may be running these companies. It's just amazing. And then we get to just talk to these companies that are in our portfolio. Some of them we've watched for the past 5-6 years kind of grow into what they're doing. Maybe we were their first check. Maybe we were on their first round. Maybe we were their first phone call in a round of millions, and we're a tiny check. But we get to see them evolve. And so the success is every single time a founder in our portfolio lets us know that they got a new customer, or lets us know that they feel good about next year, or lets us know we had a really bad year, but we're going to keep going, and we know what we're going to do next. All of that success. Now, over time, like this next decade, I do plan on and will accomplish the gathering of all of my personal wealth. And as you know, majority of it, like past 50, I'll probably just be deploying it, is what I mean. And I'll be generating it in the next decade. And so there will be a metric. There will come a day in the next 10 years where there will be some headline that says that I've reached some sort of, whatever milestone. And I will think of it as success because I can be logical there. But it's like, I'm kind of surfing a little bit on this other type of success right now. I feel that.
Right, and just because a measure is hard to quantify doesn't mean it's not the most important measure, right?
Yeah.
And how about when you're evaluating these ventures? And some people have asked this in the chat as well. When you're evaluating a venture, how are you doing that?
Few ways. Again, it's art and not science, and so. One thing to note is that I'm not the only check writer at Backstage now. It used to be just me. I did the first probably half of the companies, maybe alone, the decision at least. Now it is definitely a group effort. Chacho's on the investment team. We have Christy and Brittany who both can write autonomous checks. Chacho just brought in our last deal, actually, which is really cool. And so we each are going to have a different answer, in our own way. I'm always gonna, I feel like I'm always gonna skew early stage kind of gut instinct, the sort of the Simon Cowell way of thinking of things, and said, because I don't know, Simon can't sing a lick, but he can put two and two together, and he has that good foresight. So I look at it really there. I start there. I start with the people. I start with what they're working on. More and more as I get older and as the years go by and working and seeing so many thousands of companies, it's more and more important to me that for me to be interested in investing, not that you do this yourself, you can do whatever you want, but for me, it's like more and more important that there is some sort of impact play, whether that's social sustainability, financial equality, all of those things. I do like an impact play now. More so than I ever thought about. And then also I really look at people who, I'm doing that pattern matching thing, right? I'm looking at it. So for so long, it's been sort of like a negative connotation, because you had a lot of affluent white men saying, oh, you look like a Zuckerberg, I'll put $1 million behind you. But I'm doing that and saying, where is that woman who is from the South, and maybe she's worked her whole life and helped support her family, and she knows, she's been observing people who were superior to her in the roles, but she's been watching, and so she has all of this interesting context and point of view, and she can turn that into XYZ. I also have an affinity. I have a bias. I'm going to just say it. I have a bias. And this, sometimes people get upset with me when I say it, but I do. I have a bias for women or men who are like handling their child or children while working. I just think that there's something to be said about somebody who can multitask like that. And we're lucky enough to have two of our partners, Christy and Brittany, just had their first children, respectively, this year. So that's just a piece of it. Of course, once you get past that first part of it, just kind of that understanding what they're working on, is it interesting? Do I feel like, I started measuring it like this, do I feel like it would take me at least a decade to be able to do what they're doing? Like if you gave me a decade, would I be able to learn what they've learned and then execute like they can? And if I couldn't, that's really interesting to me, because then it helps me live longer, and it gives more width to my life, because I get to live vicariously through you. And so that's a really interesting thing for me. It's not how I use every single decision, but it does get me. It does get me. And then once you get past that, you do have to really break down some things. You know, what stage are they in? What have they done based on, that? What resources have they had at their disposal? How have they used those? What traction do they have based on those resources? They don't have many resources, but they've still gotten somewhere. You don't compare that to somebody else's, $10 million backed, but they got further. That doesn't make sense. So there's a lot to decipher and to decode and to measure. And I'm so grateful that there are many of us who get to look at deals, so that if I miss something, somebody else maybe picks it up.
Wow. I love that. You talked a lot about in just now in how investing in these overlooked founders comes with all of these other benefits. Are there benefits to them being a successful venture? Are you finding, or do you have a bias? I do, but do you have a bias that ventures that are born out of those founders will have a different impact on the world than ventures born out of the same homogenous wealth networks?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it's what's happening. It's not always the case. Sometimes you do have a Black founder who's just like, I want to do another photo app, mm-hmm. and I want to make a lot of money and figure that out. Yeah. And there's no judgment there.
No, yeah.
For me, though, it is just more exciting and more thrilling. And there's also that idea of, man, if they do really well, if they can figure this out, because it is a pain point of theirs, and because it's too difficult or it's not sexy enough, and so someone else is not going to necessarily tackle it, that's when their pain point and their individual perspective really comes into play. If you're playing that game of doing the same old thing and you're just coming from a different perspective, it's not as exciting to me to think about the potential of that and then the impact of that. We like to be involved in companies and get involved in companies where we feel like there's an inflection point happening. Mm-hmm. We're there. And if we are just right at the right time, even with a small amount of dollars relative, then that impact is just like an explosion. And we've just seen it time and time again.
Wow. Do you feel like there's something that you can tell us about the intersection with Backstage Capital and Black Lives Matter? Is there an overlap? Is there anything?
Yeah, I think about it like, well, certainly, personally, just as an emotionally involved as you can get. And I do think that during that period, I was all over the place emotionally, and all over the place, like literally, like in different press pieces and stuff. And I feel like my role here is this activism through economic empowerment, because I think a lot of things would be different if perhaps George Floyd had more personal wealth. And this is a very simplistic way of saying it, and there's entire books to be written about that. But I don't think that money fixes everything, but I do think it's so imbalanced, and that's like undeniable that's my way of sort of staying sane, is to say, what can I do? And a lot of the things that I do, it's interesting. It's funny to me because I'm so used to never having money. I've 35 years had no money, no access to it. But now it's like I have a little bit, right? And I feel like what I can do is I love backing politicians who I believe in. I love backing nonprofits who are doing this groundwork. I love speaking out and getting more people involved. I mean, we did this all summer where I would put a little bit of money in, maybe I would do a quarter of what the raise was, and then galvanize everybody else. And then like within 2 days, that whole raise would be done for this nonprofit or to save this company, this small business or something. To me, those types of things are really important, and it's not to be, it's nothing to sneeze at. And so I do think that there's an absolute correlation between the work of both. And in fact, there are a lot of people from the ground reach out for different things. So I think there needs to be people who are just in the streets, who are, and I think those same people can be this, in different places. And then I think there need to be people who can turn levers.
What's your take on failure?
What about it?
Do you have a personal view of it? I mean, really, the question I'm actually trying to lead you into is eventually I want to ask you if you're willing to share a personal failure that you've had. But I was wondering if you had, some general takes on failure.
Yeah. Generally, when I hear the word failure, it is hard for me to think of failure. Mm-hmm. Not to say it's hard for me to believe in it or to acknowledge it. I'm very, like I said, open book. Mm-hmm. But I just, again, it may sound very Pollyanna, but I just really feel like there are very few failures mm-hmm. that we experience. A lot of it is more like just truly a learning experience. Not to get it all Oprah on you, but a lot of it is not. So when I think about failure, if I had to think, what do I think I failed at? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have certainly had disappointment, mm-hmm. and I've certainly tried to reach some milestone and did not reach it. And it just, like, I'll give you an example. You tell me if this is failure, right? This is probably what would answer someone else's failure question, but I don't know if it's failure. We've always been resource strapped at Backstage, even though we've had these millions to invest in other companies. For us, we've had all these, different employees and stuff. It's always about how do we get expense money? And a lot of it comes out of pocket, and we do all that. And 2 years ago, we were talking to this company, it's a major company, and I'll tell you who it is, it's like this whole story. And we met with them, and they were going to invest $5 million into our expense and our operations. So for like $5 million for operations at that point would have just set us up for years. It just would have set us up. We would have been able to do all of our work and do the other work, with a full team. And I was so exhausted after years and years of trying. And we went into this room. It was like this big round table, and we were on one side. We brought our people on one side, and they brought their people on the other side. And there were tears at the table because we were so excited about working together. It was like a beautiful moment. And they said, okay, all we have to do is in 2 weeks, the CEO of this company, who is like this very famous guy in the industry, he's gonna fly to America, and you just need to do like a photo op with him, and you need to sign the paperwork, and we'll take pictures of it, and that'll be that. $5 million. So I'm like, awesome. And maybe it was a month from then. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So we started talking about the paperwork and everything. I then go to New York for some meetings. I wake up one day, I can still see it. I still see the bed, I still see the room. I wake up one day, 2 weeks later, and check Twitter, and the number 3 trending tweet, our trending thing was that this CEO was just arrested for all kinds of stuff. So it was this, if anybody saw this Renault, Nissan Renault thing where the guy was like, there's going to be a movie about it, I'm sure, because he kind of smuggled himself out physically in a shipping container to get out of jail and stuff. That dude was going to give us $5 million. And so I called the guys that were over the deal. And I was like, so I heard what happened. Should we sign still? I knew 100% we weren't gonna be signing, but I was just like, let's just pretend it didn't happen. And the guy was just like, you could just hear him on the call. He was just like, yeah, this is not a good day, and we're just gonna have to get back to you. And it was done. Haven't heard from him since. Dang. Never heard from him again. Yeah. They reached out to us. So again, this wasn't something we announced or anything. That was a failure to launch, but I don't feel like it was a failure. It feels like it was like, it was disappointing. It sucked. What did I learn from that? And then we go. And when I've tried to do things, I've said I wanted to do things and I wasn't able to accomplish them. So it feels the same way.
When you were first telling the bank story, I thought that's where your story was going to go. Where at the beginning of this, you were doing 10-key, you were seeing these millions of dollars, and then you decided to embezzle. But no, you found a different way to get access to that.
No way. No. That would have been funny. It's a good movie.
It would be a good movie. And then you bifurcate to this reality where you instead figured out how to crack open the venture capital.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm going to open it.
Set It Off is one of my favorite movies of all time, so you never know.
Oh, there you go. I'm going to ask a couple questions from the audience, and then I'll have one last question from the organization at the end. Layla wants to hear about seeing and understanding working with other people's interests and drivers, and just hear you talk about that, motivating other people, understanding other people, and working with them.
That's interesting. So I'm trying to form that a little bit into a question.
Maybe I'll just ask it as a question. I don't know if it's Layla's exactly, but I'm actually really curious if you have advice on how to work with diverse groups of people, people who maybe have different interests than you. How have you managed to do that?
I mean, I've been doing that my whole life, really. Starting when I started observing people on the playground as a child, rather than going to play. I used to observe people from my little office hours thing I had on the side. I mean, if you go to BackstageCapital.com at any point and you look at our crew page, which is our team. And not only our current crew, which is a lean crew, skeleton crew, but our previous, anybody who's worked with us is in the archive, because we consider everybody sort of a graduate of Backstage instead of a former employee. You'll see that it's an incredible, it certainly at one time was the most diverse venture capital fund in the country, to say the least. But you'll see there's just so many different people from all kinds of backgrounds and everything. And so it's just been really important, I think, to me, working with people, a diverse group has never been a difficult thing. That probably started in school. In school, you usually find a clique or something or a group, and I just never did. So it's a little bit of it was being an outsider. I could then go to all these different groups and feel like a little bit okay in those groups. Is a little opposite of the feeling. But it's just so important, and it's so, the way that we were able to attract that is by being very cognizant of how we portrayed, not just portrayed, but how we reflected ourselves and showed ourselves. And so people could look in and say, oh, that is a diverse group and team. I want to be part of that, and I want to then reach out. And so sometimes people companies come to us or come to me and they're like, how do you do that? We're not sure how to we're not getting enough in their pipeline. And I'm like, well, let's go to your website and let's go to your materials and let's go to your social and let's just see what your pictures look like. Like what do group pictures look like? And if you go to, or your accelerator or whatever, and you go there and you just see a homogenous group, that's what you're going to attract. You're going to attract what you show. And so you have to kind of step outside of that comfort zone. But I think that I've learned so much by listening. I'm not great at it yet, but I'm working on it. But I've learned a lot by listening. Sometimes what I'll do is, and this has nothing to do with your question, but I'll just tell you this. Sometimes what I'll do if I feel like I'm hogging the mic too much, I'll like physically put my hand over my mouth to stop myself from talking, because I'm like, you're gonna learn more from listening to that. So I don't know if that answered their question or not.
It does. Danny, who's in the audience, he often says to me that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason when he's reminding me to stop talking. And I do have a follow-up question from him and Brent, or just another question, not a follow-up question. Do you have any experience in the intersection between Black and cannabis, or between Black and renewable energy, or both? Those two.
Is it today or tomorrow? I'm speaking at a renewable energy thing. Maybe Tasha can find out. A renewable energy event for Black founders, which is cool. Just today, I had a conversation with one of our, I would say 2 or 3 of our top performing companies are in the renewable energy space. I just had an hour-long strategy session with one of the companies in our portfolio who we've known for probably like 4 or 5 years. They started out very small, and now they're worth more than $100 million. So they're in that space, still learning, but definitely that is where I'm going to be spending more and more of my time, just because this is what we have to do. There's just no question about that. Cannabis, a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I made a little bit of noise because I said something at an event and it was just pulled, and they didn't say anything else around it. They just pulled that one line. But it said like, Arlan Hamilton has no time for white men and cannabis or something like that. But what I was saying was that my brother, Rook, in Dallas, he has been arrested a few times in his like late teens and early 20s. He's 30s now. Before he was a family man and all that. But it didn't matter if he was a family man or not. He was arrested for possession of marijuana. Sometimes it was personal possession, sometimes he was selling. And then and because of that, he has for so many years not been able to vote. That's changing. For so many years, he just couldn't get an apartment. He couldn't get a good job. All of these things because of that, right? And the fact that he had to go anyway to jail. At the same time, I get calls all the time from white men and white women, frankly, who are doing cannabis companies. And I'm like, I have nothing against the cannabis side of the thing. I have a problem with it being it's a criminal offense, and I'm going to sit here and figure out a way to invest money into it being lauded. If I'm going to invest any money into any cannabis company, it's going to be Black founders. It's going to be Latinx founders. It just has to be. There's just no other way to. On top of that, we have 2 or 3 different buckets of capital that we can pull from, depending on who is making the investment. Some of those buckets do not allow for us to invest, but there's always a bucket that we can invest out of into cannabis.
This is a really interesting audience, because some of the people in this audience are on the poor white side, where they spent years in prison.
Yeah.
Years. I'm recognizing some of the names where they spent years in prison for things that while they were in prison became illegal. And rich people were making a business doing the same exact thing. And they were still, there's one person in the audience, he was still in jail when that was happening.
Yeah. It's sickening to me, and it doesn't make any sense. And why would I perpetuate? And when I do talk, I'm really talking about very well-to-do people who are like, I got $25 million for this cannabis company to do this thing. And I'm just like, and they're like, do you want to be part of it? It's going to become a unicorn. It's going to be $1 billion company. Why wouldn't you? And I'm just like, I am not going to be a party to that.
Yeah. No, when you look at the whole system, yeah. Absolutely, there's some chat follow up on that, and I was just representing Humboldt, which is this little unique little bubble, which brings me to my next question, which is, okay, here we are in this rural community, and we have this competition looking to help build ventures working on agriculture, water, energy in a regenerative way. So like you, it's like we're only looking for things that have analyzed the impact. It's part of our judging criteria. This first year, our top prize is $3,000 and 20 hours of consulting. So, you know, for us, that's actually that's
amazing.
Money.
That's amazing.
And so I know this is a broad question, right? But a lot of the people that are taking part, they have no friends that have made successful big businesses. They're just trying to figure out how to do it. What advice would you give at that stage?
Well, I always
sorry to throw that at you.
No, that's fine. I always talk about uniqueness and how, like, we just can't take that for granted. You cannot take the fact that you are who you are for granted. And we're lumping a lot of people in the same categories just for time and convenience, right? But we're talking about affluent white people and poor white people and Black people and this and that. But if you think about what is interesting and what is memorable, a lot of times it is someone who has like a really, really colorful story. And sometimes, yes, it does mean there's hardships behind that. But whatever that is, that has now become part of your narrative, and it's something that can be either in your branding or it can be something that you just know internally, and it gives you an edge in some way because it's you. And so why don't you become the one that your friends say, I know this person who did well? You know, you don't necessarily have to be following someone. You may be able to become that person in your friend group. And entrepreneurship in general is very isolating and very lonely. And you know, don't cry for me, Argentina, but sometimes it is lonely when you're successful. And so another thing I'll say is, like, the same thing you say to teenagers who are just desperate to grow up. You say, please do not grow up so fast that you miss out, that the youth is wasted on the youth, right? Like, please don't wish to be something so much different that you miss out on this moment. And I apply that to people who are just starting their companies. For instance, imagine you're someone, and you don't have to imagine, most people here, it's hard to raise capital if you want to raise capital. It may be hard to get your first people who believe in you. I know a guy who sold his company 5 years ago because he's out of his 5-year contract. He sold his company 5 years ago for $50 million. He started it with like his wife's 401k, basically, because no one believed in him. It was a podcasting company. Nobody believed it was a good idea. Nobody thought, podcasting, what are you doing, right? He started like a decade ago and sold it like 5 years ago. And because, he chased all this money, and because he couldn't ever find anybody to invest, and the only equity he gave away was to a co-founder. When he sold for $50 million, you can do the math on that. If he had gone the venture route, he would have probably walked away with 10%, 15%, because he would have gone through 2-3 major rounds by then. If it would have happened, if his investors would have let him sell at 50 to begin with, because to them that might have been too small. So all these things just mean, like, reassess and recalibrate what exactly your situation is today. It may seem like a bummer, but if you really start putting things into perspective, it actually turns it. That's why my book is called Being Underestimated into Your Greatest Advantage. It's like what you feel like is like the thing that's the negative right now may be the best thing ever. Going back to that story I told you about, the international espionage, whatever thing that happened where the guy was arrested, even though it was crushing at the time, if they had given us $5 million, we'd probably still be under their thumb right now, playing games their way. Right now, try to tell me something. Try. My mother's actually here, so she can. But like, try to tell me something. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, it's like, did I dodge a bullet?
Yeah. So that comes back to that optimism that I just always seeing in you, right? Where it's like, okay, a failure, but then there's this optimism, and then this, looking at it on this side. I've also in the past heard you talk about your mom, and my mom had a major impact on my life. I'm wondering, do you see any connection between having a loving mom and your optimism?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not only just a loving mom, because that's 100% the case, but a mom who's like, my mom for years after I booked the 2 tours like from scratch, right? After I had a music magazine that was like read by 10,000 people around the world. After all of that, my mom would just go around telling all her friends, Arlan can type 100 words a minute. She was so stoked about that. She never, like, I had that in school, and she never let that go. And so it was not just loving, it was like, you hung the moon, and not everybody gets that, and if you do have that, if you someone in your life, whether it's your parent or a sibling or a spouse or a friend or whoever, if you do have that, just count yourself really, really lucky, because it is definitely not necessarily the norm, but it had everything to do with it. It also, a lot of it came from just the chip on your shoulder that you get when you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Mm-hmm. You want to, like, my success, I feel, is my activism as well. Like, just unbridled success. Not where I am today, but where I want to be is my activism. And so that gives you like this sort of energetic, upbeat, against all odds kind of vibe.
Olivia has a question, and I also want to let everyone know in a couple of minutes, I'm going to open up the screen. I'm going to ask you to put your video on. I'm going to turn off the spotlights just so we can spend the last minute waving to each other and just seeing each other in this audience, and maybe seeing people that are in your community that you didn't know were interested at this level, so you can reach out to them later. You can also chat people in the chat. Before we get there, I got maybe maybe 2 more questions. Olivia asked if you can
I do have a hard out at 6:30. So
okay, great. Yeah, so we'll get that. We'll do probably just maybe a short one on this question. Olivia says, can you speak more about how venture capitalism can support regeneration and sustainability?
We have well, not regeneration necessarily, but we do have a company in our portfolio that we invested a small amount in early on. We were their only like venture funding that is working on a protein to regenerate. And I think this is what you're talking about, so correct me if I'm wrong, but for people who have had accidents that cause being paralyzed, not people who are born paralyzed. And so that's like I think that's the only in that space that we have touched on. And then when it comes to sustainability, we probably have maybe 8 to 10% of our portfolio is thinking in that way in one way or another. There are some funds out there, huge funds, that's all they do. There's some funds that it's just, that is their reason for being. And they also see it to be a very lucrative space. So I think that if anything, that's where venture capital should be playing. If anything, that's what the legacy of venture capital should be. Because it on its own, venture is just so boring and so self-absorbed. But if anything, this small sliver of private equity that's supposed to be the innovative capital should be going towards things that are life-changing and world-changing.
Fantastic. I'm going to unspotlight my video, and then I'm going to also unspotlight Arlan's video. But Arlan, as we wave goodbye to you and thank you for your time, so we'll clap, we'll put up our hands. I'd love if you could just have one parting word to those of us that are trying to make the world a better place, and so far haven't been handed the 50,000, the 50 million that we need to do it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd say go after the 3K. Go after, like, good luck with everybody there. I would say do do a diagnostic. Go back and say how much, instead of saying how much money can I raise, say how much of my company can I keep? How much ownership, control, autonomy can I keep? Can I hold on to for dear life for as long as possible? Change the game. You're changing the game overnight by doing that. And in other cases, just know that there's somebody, again, embroidered pillow of the day, but there's somebody who is looking for you. I say this all the time. I say, be yourself so that the people looking for you can find you. They know where to find you, right? There are people looking for you, your customers, your coworkers. The future is looking for you. It's absolutely true. And people more and more, especially today, we're looking for we're looking for life affirming people to work with. We're looking for inspiration. So if you can be those things, that's more valuable than any kind of capital that you can pull in, because it's unique and it's what's needed. And you think about the richest people in the world, the most successful people in the world, they still long for something. Probably there's a billionaire sitting around right now who is longing for a friend who is as funny as you are, or a person who is as creative as you are, to be in their orbit or something like that. And you'll never know that people are longing for that. So I would just say, kind of just really think about what you already have and try your best. And this is just easier said than done, but try your best not to compare yourself to too many other people, because that's a losing game. And it's never accurate. You never have all the right facts in order to do so. So focus on what you're doing, focus on what you're working on. I wish everybody the best of luck during this competition. Please share with us a couple of the highlights that you think are interesting for us to take a look at. Lonnie, send them over. And yeah, wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Arlan. Everyone, if you click gallery view, you can see everyone. Arlan has to leave right now. We appreciate you so much. The comments were amazing. I feel completely inspired. It was amazing meeting you. Thank you, Chacho, for being here and supporting as well.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, my mom's in the audience. Hi, Mom.
Hey, what's your mom's name? Where is she?
Joy. She's Joy in the red shirt.
Hey, Joy. Oh, hey, how you doing? My mom, Arlene Sims. You can say hi to her. Arlene, Joy.
Very best part of distance for me is that I get to have my mom in these presentations.
That's awesome. I love that. That's so cool. All right.